The Cannabis Conversation. A European perspective on the emerging legal cannabis industry.
Welcome to the Cannabis Conversation with Hughes, where we explore the new legal cannabis industry by speaking to the professionals that are helping shape it. Hope you're all well. My little sister got married on the weekend, so I've spent most of this week recovering. But it was a lovely day with lovely weather, and my dad totally smashed his speech, so I was a very proud son and brother. Very nice weekend. But back to the world of cannabis. Been a fairly eventful week. Some really big news stateside from the US. President Joe Biden granted a pardon to all people convicted of simple marijuana possession under federal law. This is probably his most significant White House action taken to date on US drug policy during his tenure. He's kind of failed to live up to some promises. So it's good that he's making this move. These things are always very political, and no doubt this is highly motivated by the upcoming midterm elections in the US, but symbolically, I think this is huge, and so hopefully there's more to come from it. Meanwhile, in the UK, we seem to be heading further backwards in the opposite direction. I've made no bones about how repugnant I think this Conservative government are, and it seems that getting rid of the awful and embarrassing Boris Johnson hasn't really changed much. By all accounts, a quite shambolic Tory party conference last week, but it seems that senior Conservative police chiefs are calling for cannabis to be upgraded to Schedule A alongside heroin. And the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, who's desperately trying to sound tough, much like her predecessor, Priti Patel, is apparently quite sympathetic to this viewpoint. Although Downing Street has released a statement to say that they aren't considering rescheduling to Schedule A. I don't think anyone really trusts anything that comes out of their mouth. So certainly when it comes to drugs, but seemingly the economy too, and many other key policy areas, they are completely out of touch and not evidence-based in their approach. So we watch with anticipation. Anyway, let's be a bit more positive. We have a great episode coming up now. I've been very privileged to be asked to co-host a medical cannabis patient conference, which is coming up in London at the beginning of November. And I've got the key organisers on the show today to discuss what it's all about. Once again, this episode is sponsored by our very good friends at Lumino. Lumino have been great supporters of patients and have helped to find jobs for some of them in this new industry. They are very well connected and super helpful in giving people advice on various aspects of the space. Always happy to chat too. So as always, if you need any help with HR or recruitment, just get in touch with them at luminorecruit.com. And obviously, please mention my name when you do. Now, on with the show. Enjoy. We have a special episode today to help promote an upcoming patient conference in London. Fabulous lineup of guests to chat to. We have Mags Houston, who is Head of Projects and Comms for Drug Science. We have Hannah Deacon, who's Director at Maple Tree Consultants. Matt Hughes, who is co-founder of MedCan Support. And lastly, my arch rival podcaster, the fantastic Mary Biles, writer and host of Cannabis Voices. They all wear many more hats in the cannabis space, but I'll let them talk about that in a minute. Team, how are we? Welcome.
Good, thank you. Great to be here. Thanks, Anuj.
Yeah.
Whoop, whoop.
Good to have this all-star lineup. We've got a lot to talk about today. The conference is coming up in November. But before we do that, can I get each of you to sort of introduce yourselves and say a bit more about what you do in the cannabis space? Mags, do you want to kick off?
Yes, happy to. So hi, I'm Mags. I work at Drug Science. And as you said, Anuj, I'm head of projects and comms for Drug Science. But actually, over the last couple of years, my main focus has been in driving forward our medical cannabis study at Drug Science, which is also the largest real-world evidence study of its kind in the UK, called Project 2021. And we're now at over 3,200 patients, which is incredible. We've really seen the market shift over the last couple of years since the project was introduced. We've seen the cost of prescriptions come down, but we still haven't seen NHS access for most people. So the fight goes on, but that's really how I've got into the space and become so passionate about medical cannabis and advocating for it in the UK.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mags. And we'll hear a bit more about the inspiration for the conference in a second from you. Hannah, do you want to go next?
Thanks, Anuj, and thanks very much for having me here today. I would call myself a campaigner, absolutely, right from the beginning. The reason I got into this space is because of my son Alfie, who suffered hundreds of seizures a week and now has an NHS prescription which has been funded since June 2018. After we ran a campaign in the media and met the Prime Minister and really sort of pushed to get him that help. And I'm very blessed to have that. And when the law changed, I thought, great, our story has helped millions of people. And the reality was, and I remember the day the law changed, I sat in tears because it didn't change anything for anyone. And we still only have 3 prescriptions on the NHS. And I've therefore spent the last 4 years helping to develop the Medical Cannabis Clinicians Society, because I believe that clinicians are the key to opening this sector. I've helped set up MedCan Support with Matt. I'm a co-founding member of that because I really understand what it's like to suffer as a family with a disabled child. And I want to try and use my experience to help other people and to do better and to give support, all the things that I didn't have, and the education and the understanding and how we talk to doctors, etc., which I didn't have. And then thirdly, I set up Maple Tree Consultants with my friend and colleague, Professor Mike Barnes. And the reason I did that is because I feel really, really strongly that people like me should have a voice in this sector. We have to accept the private sector is there. It's going to be there. It's going to be the only place that people can get access until we, unlock the mess of the NHS access issue. And I feel that I want to try and make it as good as it can be for patients and ensure the private sector understand who they're serving and do as well as they can for the people that they serve.
Absolutely, and fantastic work you're doing as well, Hannah, so thank you. Matt, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so basically it's a very similar story to Hannah, except we don't have an NHS prescription. So my son's been prescribed cannabis since May 2019, and we have been fighting ever since for NHS access. And yeah, as Hannah's already mentioned, MedCan Support came about. When we were told the NHS could do no more for my son, and he was suffering 120 seizures, he's on multiple anti-epileptics, had no quality of life, and there's a very real risk of losing him, we would do anything to kind of find an alternative. So the more I kept researching, cannabis kept cropping up, but that information was all over the place. Google was kind of our saviour, so to speak, but I didn't know what information was relevant, what was correct, what was wrong. So this is where MedCan Support, and through our own experiences, we've created a community. We now support over 600 or nearly 600 families. And it's not just epilepsy, it's paediatric cancers as well, and other forms of paediatric conditions where cannabis could be useful. So yeah, that's basically me. We set up a hub for education, support and research.
Brilliant. Thank you also, Matt. And yeah, we'll come on to the parent experience a bit later in the interview, so appreciate that. Last but not least, Mary, I think one of the very first people I met in the cannabis industry in Cannabis Europa 2018 actually. But please do the honours, Mary.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember we met. It seems such a long time ago and so much has happened, but at the same time not. So really, I'm a podcaster, but I really write. I feel like I'm a kind of bridge between two worlds. So I try and tell people stories. I try and take deep dives into the science behind cannabis. I wrote a book a few years ago called the CBD Book. But really, I think I'm just a squeaky wheel. That's my job. I call out the crap sometimes because there is a lot. So, and I think because I'm independent and I'm knocking on a bit, that gives me license to say what I think.
Fantastic introduction, Mary. Thank you. And yeah, great variety of input here today. We're all here to talk about the patient conference, and Mags, you are our fearless leader in this respect. So please, will you start off and tell us actually a bit about the conference, so where, when, and most importantly, why?
Thank you. So having been to a few more B2B, shall we say, events over the last couple of years, as well as the more patient-led webinars, as well as the more recreational focused festivals and events, I realised that there was a big gap when it came to in-person events for medical cannabis patients, and indeed for people, the members of the public, to learn more about medical cannabis in person, to meet with patients themselves, to hear the stories that they've got to tell about their journeys with cannabis. And so Matt and I were chatting, I think it was at a Cannabis Industry Council event actually, at one of our meetings, and we were talking about this gap and thinking, right, how do we fill it? Because someone has got to do this. Someone has got to create an event that could bring the whole industry together, but most importantly, the patients. And so that's how it was all born about. That the UK's first medical cannabis patient conference came to life, and we wanted to do it in celebration of Medical Cannabis Awareness Week, which falls the first week of November, so from the 1st to the 7th of November every year. And it was started by PLE, the patient advocacy group, a couple of years ago during the first lockdown, where they did some fantastic webinars and really raised awareness around medical cannabis. So we want to build off the success of that and create something where people can come in person and meet with each other, hear the stories of prescribers, hear the stories of patients, and really make sure that people's voices can be heard in the way that they haven't been up until this point. So the conference will be an all-day event on Friday, the 4th of November. We've decided to hold it in London just because it is, the easiest place for most people to get to, but certainly it would be wonderful to do more elsewhere in the UK in years to come. But to start off, we're going to be in London. We're going to be in Hackney at a venue called Oval Space, and we have capacity for hundreds of people. I'm thrilled to say we're actually sold out of our in-person tickets. However, we always had the motivation of wanting to ensure that people could get there, even if they are in, the darkest, deepest corners of Scotland, or indeed the other side of the world. So we made sure that we could have this event live streamed. And so it's going to be a hybrid event that everyone can access, everyone can come to. So we'll be starting off the day at around 10:30 in the morning and going all day. And then hopefully there'll be plenty of time at the end of the day for socialising and networking after the main event is out of the way, and discussions will continue, I imagine, right into the evening. So that's really a kind of a whistle-stop tour of what we've got planned.
Fantastic. And that's great news that it's sold out for in person, but let's try and get some live streamers on there as well.
And when I say it's sold out, Anuj, I should also add that it is free. So we wanted to make it, again, as accessible as possible by enabling people to get there for free. So the same goes for live stream. We don't believe that patients should have to be paying much, if anything, to access an event of this nature.
Yeah, quite right too, I think. And yeah, thank you for the overview. It makes a lot of sense, and I'm very fortunate to be part of that as well. And so, Mary, maybe I'll flip to you next, and we sort of talk a bit about your podcast named Cannabis Voices. You've spoken to lots of patients. How underrepresented do you feel they are, and how important do you think the conference is?
I think they feel voiceless and not listened to, really, and not seen. And that's a really painful place to be, over and above having, a chronic illness that's more or less controlled by some kind of medication if they're lucky. So I feel like this event is so important. When I've spoken to patients, they're so happy to have somewhere, to have a community where they can come, where they can be seen, where they can be heard, where they've got a place. Because certainly, patients who have been lucky enough to be able to travel, because not all patients can, and actually to even just attend like a full day event if you've got chronic pain or a host of other conditions can be really tricky. So, but I know patients in the past have gone along to other kind of more B2B events, hoping to find community there, and haven't. It was a B2B event, so it was never going to happen. But when there were patient panels, some of which I moderated, it was like a second thought to actually have a patient on it. It was like, or there was, it's about a patient's condition. It was just kind of crazy, really. So I've always felt, when I've been involved with any of these conferences, be they online or in person, that I've had to really, really fight to get a patient's presence. And so, it's really heartening, not only, I think, for myself and other advocates in the industry and people involved, that there is this is going to exist, hopefully, on a yearly basis, and in other cities, that, it truly is hopefully inclusive. Because, one could argue that the cannabis industry isn't inclusive, but that's another story. So, yeah, it's great. And, just to have a voice and to be listened to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess ultimately the long-term hope is that we don't need a patient conference because everyone has access, and, a lot of these issues aren't there anymore. But whilst the situation is as it is, I think this is a vital project.
And also, just to say as well, it's about empowering. I think, sometimes you can feel disempowered, particularly if you go along to an event like that. It's like, so I think, whatever that feels empowering, I think it's got to be a positive thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Hannah, Matt, the patient conference will get a lot of actual patients there, but your situation is slightly different. Your parents and carers. How different is it for you? But also, how do you feel that input will affect the conference, or what's your take on it?
Funny enough, me and Hannah were in a meeting yesterday, and Alfie and Billy changed the law. It was children that changed the law. It was their fight that brought cannabis about. It's children that made this sector what it is now. There's still much to change, and it's still growing. But we both were saying that the sector has moved away. Children have been forgotten about. Much of the industry is moving towards pain and anxiety, and that is where the larger cohort of patients are, and that's prominently where the money is. So yeah, I think it's just, again, keeping our voice in the sector and being a voice for our families, for my son and for the many others out there. But I think also we have always been predominantly about epilepsy. I've been speaking to families quite recently who sadly have lost children to cancer, but they were using cannabis from illicit sources and they feel so isolated. And so we need to be a voice for them as well. It's not just about epilepsy, it's about these other conditions, and it does expand a lot further. So yeah, I want to use the patient conference to be a voice for families, essentially, and for children suffering many conditions.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I feel that the private sector has thoroughly let down families and children with epilepsy, as Matt said, because none of them would be here if the law hadn't changed. But they've turned their back on the people that changed the law. And I think that is disgraceful. And I think that we need to keep highlighting that. And I think the private sector could do so much more to provide a better experience, to try and help bring on prescribers for children, to try and get better product available to cheaper prices, that sort of thing. But they're just not interested because it's a small cohort of children and it's too hard. And I think that they're going for the easy route and looking for the big patient cohorts, which is very sad. So I think we need to continue to highlight that. I'd also just sort of come back to what Mary was saying about feeling isolated. When you're a parent carer, you are very isolated. I think society thinks that because we're the parents, that it's our job to look after our children. And, I never set out to have a child with a disability. It was not in my plan. It was not what I wanted to do. But I had that child and I had to deal with it. And I spent 6 years at home, never hardly leaving my house other than to take my son to hospital. And I felt completely unseen. My life has completely changed because Alfie has the medicine that's supplied to him by the NHS, and he's seizure free and has been for over 2.5 years. And that has meant that I can go to work, that I do feel seen and that I do feel relevant. And that's what drives me and why I feel so passionate about this, because there are thousands of parents up and down this country that are not seen and are not appreciated by our society, and actually are saving this government probably billions of pounds by keeping their children and their loved ones out of hospital and out of services because they're doing all the care. And I think that's something that, is really, really important, and we should be talking about that as well. And, I'm just really grateful that we're doing this patient conference. It's really important. As you say, patients are relevant. Patients and doctors are relevant. And actually the private sector need to remember, without patients and doctors having a good experience, they won't be here either, because patients will just leave and doctors will just leave. So private sector have such an important role here as well. And we need to be talking about that, about why they need to do better, why they need to make it better experiences for doctors and for patients, because it isn't good enough at the moment in some areas. So, I think it's a really good platform, and it's really exciting that it's happening. We're looking forward to it.
Yeah, and thank you both. And it's a very useful reminder because, it was children that kind of moved this. And that's not just in the UK as well.
It's all over the world, yeah.
Yeah. And it's a shame that that's been forgotten. And actually, my next question was going to be about industry. And you talked about that. With my cynical hat on, I think a lot of people are pretending or playing to be medical companies, but not actually doing the things that warrant that title. How are you kind of seeing that? And how you just sort of spoken about it? Maybe Mary or Mags, do you want to input on that side of things?
So Mary alluded to this earlier, that there was a call for producers to really listen to their patients and to include patients into their business model, essentially, in order to further their own strategies and how they develop their products. And from where I'm sitting, I'm just not seeing that's happening at the moment. On the flip side, I am seeing patient groups actually losing their voice. There are different groups who have their different specialisms in the patient advocacy sector, and I am seeing them struggle because they do not have the funding to do the work that is so desperately needed. I would love to see producers funding patient advocacy groups such as MedCan Support, such as PLE, because these are organisations that are so needed in this industry to provide resources, to provide support for patients and such needed tools and resources. All you have to do is go on the websites of these organisations and you can see all the information that's out there for patients. These people have had to volunteer their time for free to create. And wouldn't it be wonderful if the producers in this industry would fund those people's salaries to create these much needed resources?
Yeah, I just very quickly want to come in on that, Max. I completely agree with you. And it's really, really, really short-sighted of the private sector not to see the point of funding these groups, because it gives you access to patients. And, you know, I do a lot of that work as a parent of a patient with Maple Tree Consultants. That's what I do engage with lots of businesses. But obviously, I'm just one person with one perspective from what I've been through. And I completely agree with you. There should be and it's something I say to business, you know, that you should be having a patient on your board, you know, on your advisory board. You should be asking that patient, how should this journey look like? What does it feel like? How do I want to be treated? All of those things, because they think they know it and they don't. And I agree with you. And it's really short-sighted because actually these companies can't advertise. So they need to be connecting with patients. They need to be connecting with doctors. And how they do that is by supporting the groups and funding them and helping to give them access. So it is short-sighted and it needs to change, definitely.
Yeah, I'll just add to that is, you know, I hear all the time when we're at Cannabis Europa, it was, how do we drive investment? How do we attract that investment to the sector? And it's patients. It's always the larger the cohort of patients, you attract more investment. Well, as Hannah's alluded to, they can't advertise. You can't advertise medicines. Patient groups can, though. We're the ones on the forefront of advocacy. We're the ones reaching out to the patients. We are all voluntary, though. We're all full-time. You know, myself, Hannah and Callie, we work full-time. It's a similar situation with PLE. You know, all our time is given for free. MedCan's been funded out of our own pockets. You know, the website we pay for out of our own pockets. Me designing everything. We don't bring in expertise from outside. It's all of us internally doing all the work. So yeah, funding is vital for us to continue doing our work. And imagine the sector without us. If we all disappeared, what would the sector look like? You know, that's a question that, you know, would we be where we are now without the patient groups?
Because the patients are what are going to continue to drive for change. And that change is not being driven for by the private sector. So the only way that things will improve for the private sector and for patients is for patients to help drive that forward. And if we weren't here, it wouldn't happen. Also,
just add from a paediatric perspective is the need for data and clinical trials. At the moment, this sector seems to be very concentrated on specials, whereas for NHS access and for those of us that need that clinical oversight, and we're, you know, very much involved, our clinicians are very much involved in our care through the NHS, we need licensed products. And at the moment, I'm not seeing many at all looking to bring licensed products to the market. Yes, it's like condition specific data that we need.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, Mary and I were both on stage at Cannabis Europa, and this was definitely talked about. You know, if you want to call yourself medical and you're not talking to patients or investing in research, I'm not sure you can call yourself medical. Mary, have you got any views on the industry patient axis?
I guess like what we've been talking about in terms of funding patient advocacy groups, and it seems like, I don't know, I guess because there's, you know, essentially no one's making any money. So it's like the whole kind of corporate social responsibility is a bit further up the kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. At the moment, I guess they're in sort of survival mode. And so that's like a luxury, I guess. I mean, I think some of the clinics, I've had a little kind of nose around, they have kind of patient forums and like kind of seem to have like monthly, or I don't know, some sort of regular webinars with clinicians and patients and some sort of interaction to try and have some accountability. I don't know if that's, across the sector. I don't know if it's lip service, but yeah, I mean, it's definitely, there could do with at least more dialogue. I mean, there are some initiatives, with VoltFast, you have that there is that kind of
patient first.
Yeah, patient first. Yeah. So perhaps Hannah, you could, that you might explain what that is, which can help this cause along, so actually businesses can speak to patients, have focus groups, get information that's going to help them develop their products so they're actually useful to patients, because that seems to be the message. Certainly, I mean, I suppose I speak more to adult patients, that they're not being designed for the patients, and not looking at other delivery methods. And I don't know, it's definitely kind of falling short.
Well, funnily enough, that is the topic of one of the panels I'm going to be hosting at the patient conference, exactly that. What is leading you other than just another high THC strain? Hannah, do you want to talk about Patient First quickly?
Yeah, Patients First was a VoltFast idea, but they came to us to talk to us about us supporting it, and we very much do, because it's one thing that I recognise and keep, still working on, is that companies are very good at extracting information from patients, but they don't want to pay for it. But again, the only way you create products that patients want is by talking to them. So it's basically focus groups. So it's run by VoltFast. We support it. So you can sign up as a patient, you can sign up to their database, and then companies work with them to say, for example, they want to develop a particular product for a particular condition, and they would like to have a focus group of 10 people who will come and talk to them about what they think about, their condition and what a product might look like and whether they've used cannabis, that sort of thing. And it's working really well. And we've had some great feedback already from companies that have used the service. And I think and we do, most importantly, pay patients for that service. So pay them for their time. And I think, again, that's really, really important to do. So, yeah. And hopefully Katia will be able to talk a bit more about it when she's at the conference as well.
Yeah, I wanted to say that VoltFast will be very much there at the conference. They'll have their own stall. So if people do want to find out how to get involved, they can speak to the VoltFast team there. And as Hannah said, Katia will be speaking in one of the panels as well. I'd also like to give a shout out to a couple of producers who've been very kind to sponsor us for the conference. They are Ananda Development and Chilam, both female led, I should point out as well. They are both including patients in the work they're doing to develop their products. So their research really is driven by patients, and I think they set a fantastic example for the industry. I hope that more producers might follow suit and ensure that they are involving patients in the same way.
Absolutely. And thank you all for that input. So we're sort of coming towards the end now. Maybe we'll try and end on a more positive note. What are some of the positive outcomes that we're hoping for from the conference?
I don't know, a connection, empowerment for patients, some solutions. I think a big topic is going to be the stigma that patients, that's again negative, but, we're going to be speaking about the situation with the police and from, both from the patient perspective and hopefully the difficulties that the police face because they're not educated either. I would love on that front, some kind of plan of action. It's probably like a bit of a big ask, but, how can we educate more the authorities like the DVLA, that patients are having real difficulties with the kind of organizations that are supposed to be there to protect us and make life easier. So
absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's really nice, and it's going to be nice to create a networking environment for patients, because that's one thing that, when I went and took my son to Holland, I felt like I was the only parent in the world with a child with epilepsy, which I knew wasn't true, but I didn't know anyone with a child with epilepsy. My friends and family were wonderful, but they didn't understand what it felt like for me and the grief I felt that my child was so ill. And I have had so much comfort from meeting other parents who are going through the same thing. And that doesn't make it go away. It makes it easier to feel that you're not alone. So I think this conference, bringing everyone together, is a wonderful thing. And hopefully everyone will get a lot of support and love from it. And finally, I think as well, there are some patients out there that I think have a lot of resentment towards the industry, and rightly so. But I'm hoping that if we could try and bring everyone together in the sector, that actually some of these patients can talk to people within the sector and doctors as well, and try to understand what the challenges are. Because I think as well, we must understand that there are a lot of challenges for the people in the private sector. It's not all sort of bad management. Sometimes it's just people trying their best and it doesn't go that well because, of the regulations and all the other things everyone has to jump through. So I think hopefully bringing everyone together and just listening to other points of view might help people to understand that actually many people in the private sector are really trying their best to do their best. And, hopefully bringing everyone together will make people see that.
I'd say just raising awareness. At the moment, stigma is a huge barrier. And I hope, this event will be the start of public awareness. And, as we go on a year, and hopefully it will grow and the industry grows and we get more patients, it's for the general public just to hear about patient stories and for them to have a voice and to advocate and, talk about how cannabis has changed their lives, and clinicians as well, to share their experiences and help towards legitimizing cannabis as a medicine and really trying to change and break down the narrative.
Absolutely. Mags, last word?
2 words. Awareness. So hopefully we can get some media there, get some people's attention, spread the word about medical cannabis more generally, and community. As Hannah said, bringing people together is the most important and most powerful thing that we can do here. So I'm excited about the future, and I really hope this is the beginning of something really, really beautiful for the industry.
Absolutely. And for my part, I think I was reading an article recently, The Future of Healthcare is Community. And I think this is a vital part of this. It's not just people can bond online, etc., but being in person, I think, is a very important aspect of this. So yeah, very much looking forward to it. So Max, do you just want to leave with the vital details of when and where? And I'll be sharing all the details when I push the podcast out.
Absolutely. If you'd like to register for the event, we have infinite live streaming tickets available. So please do go to the Drug Science website, click on events, and you'll find the Eventbrite page there where you can register. We also welcome those who cannot attend in person anymore to cancel their tickets so that it frees up those tickets for other patients who might want to still get there in person. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to drop us an email, info@drugscience.org.uk, and we look forward to welcoming you on the 4th of November.
Fantastic. Thank you all, guys, for joining me today, and I look forward to a great event in a month's time.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.